My son-in-law gifted me divorce papers. She never expected my revenge at the luxury birthday party. He smiled wider, mistaking my calm for compliance. This was the moment he'd been building toward, the moment he thought he'd converted me from obstacle to ally. The aging mother-in-law who would stay quiet and let him work. Do you know someone who discovered their own signature on documents they never signed? Hi viewers, kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family, enjoy the story. If you've ever trusted someone who used your love as a weapon against your own child, this story will shake you to your core. Have you ever felt that gut-wrenching moment when you realize the person sitting at your dinner table has been planning your family's destruction? Has something like this happened in your community, where someone you welcomed into your home turned that trust into theft? Do you know someone who discovered their own signature on documents they never signed? I'm about to tell you about the morning I opened what I thought was a birthday gift and found divorce papers with my forged signature, papers that would have stolen everything my daughter inherited from her late father. Follow along as we uncover how a mother's quiet investigation brought down a master manipulator at his own birthday party. The velvet felt expensive between my fingers. Inside were divorce papers, with my own signature supporting him against my daughter. I stood in my kitchen that Tuesday morning, holding an envelope that looked like a birthday surprise. My son-in-law David had handed it to me with that charming smile he'd perfected over 3 years of marriage to my daughter. The kind of smile that made neighbors think he was generous and made my daughter think she was lucky. Open it now, Mom, he said, using that casual tone that never quite felt natural. I think you'll find it interesting. The papers inside were crisp. Legal size. Superior Court of California header. Petition for dissolution of marriage. My daughter's name listed as respondent. And there, on page 4, my own signature as a witness, supporting his request for spousal support and asset division. I had never signed anything. The room tilted. Coffee still percolated in the background. My daughter hummed from the next room, completely unaware that her husband had just shown me the legal documents that would destroy her life. Documents that used my name to validate his claims. David leaned against the counter, watching my face with curious satisfaction. She'll be out by summer, he whispered, quiet enough that only I could hear. The estate will be mine. The winery, the house, even the settlement from her father's accident. All of it. My hands didn't shake. They should have, but they didn't. Instead, I found myself studying his handwriting on the grocery list stuck to the refrigerator. Comparing it to the signature he'd forged. Different pen pressure. Same slant. How thoughtful, I said, folding the papers back into their velvet prison. You always think ahead. He smiled wider, mistaking my calm for compliance. This was the moment he'd been building toward, the moment he thought he'd converted me from obstacle to ally. The aging mother-in-law who would stay quiet and let him work. If family betrayal terrifies you, subscribe. These red flags repeat. Won't subscribe? Comment why below. My daughter walked in then, carrying her morning tea, still in the soft pajamas her father had bought her years ago. Lupus had made her careful with her energy, measured with her movements. She looked fragile and trusting and completely unprepared for what was coming. What's in the pretty envelope? She asked, settling into her chair at the kitchen table where we'd eaten thousands of meals together. Just some paperwork David wanted me to review, I said, watching his face carefully. Nothing urgent. David nodded, pleased with my performance. He thought I understood the game now. He thought I would choose his version of family peace over my daughter's financial survival. He was wrong. That night, after they went to bed, I sat at my computer and began typing names into search engines. David Collins, corporate consultant. His LLC registrations. His previous addresses. His family's Orange County real estate holdings. But first, I memorized every detail of that forged signature. The way he'd made my H in Henderson too tall. The way he'd pressed too hard on the N in my first name, Helen. The way he tried to make his careful handwriting look like my loose, grandmother scrawl. Screenshot that signature detail, it becomes crucial evidence. I smiled back and said, "How thoughtful." Then I memorized every detail of that forged signature. I poured his coffee like always. He never noticed I was studying his handwriting on the grocery list. The next morning felt different, though David couldn't see it. I woke at 5:30, same as always. Made coffee, same as always. Set out his travel mug with 2 sugars and cream, same as always. But now every mundane gesture carried weight. I watched him write milk, bread, batteries in his precise corporate script. The same careful strokes that had forged my name on legal documents designed to rob my daughter. He signed DC at the bottom of the list, a habit that would become evidence. "Need anything else from the store?" he asked, checking his phone for messages. "Just the usual," I said, wiping down counters that were already clean. "Drive safe." Ever had to pretend everything was normal while your world cracked? My daughter emerged around 8, moving slowly but steadily. The lupus had stolen some of her energy but none of her kindness. She kissed my cheek and settled into her morning routine, tea, vitamins, gentle stretching by the window. "David seemed happy this morning," she said, organizing her pill organizer with the same careful attention her father had shown with his carpentry tools. "Must be excited about the birthday party planning." The birthday party. Right. The 40th celebration he'd been planning for months, complete with a rented vineyard space in Napa and guest list that read like a who's who of Orange County finance. The party where he planned to announce his new ventures and investments funded with her inheritance. "Tell me about the party plans," I said casually, refilling her teacup. She lit up. "It's going to be beautiful." He rented the Sunset Ridge Vineyard, you know, the one with the view of the valley. He says it's his gift to himself after all the hard work this year. Hard work. That's what he called systematically stealing from his sick wife. "Sounds expensive," I said. "He says we can afford it now. All the consulting contracts are paying off." She smiled, trusting and proud. "He's been handling all the finances since I got sick. I don't know what I'd do without him. Miss one manipulation signal, lose everything. Subscribe to spot them early." I kissed her forehead and retreated to my room, where I'd hidden a small notebook behind my jewelry box. Time to start documenting everything. Every conversation. Every casual comment about money. Every time he checked his phone during family dinners. But first, I needed to check something. His laptop stayed open on the dining room table. The cloud folder was still logged in. I had maybe 15 minutes before he returned from the store. 15 minutes to see what else he was hiding. I moved quickly but carefully, photographing screen after screen with my phone. Email folders. Banking apps. A shared drive labeled Henderson Estate Planning that made my blood run cold. The grocery list lay next to the keyboard. Milk, bread, batteries. Signed DC, in that same careful script that had forged my identity onto legal documents. I added my own item to his list, justice. Already in progress. Chich. Then I erased it and went back to making lunch, humming softly like nothing had changed. The draft folder contained 17 versions. My daughter's name disappeared after version 12. I waited until 2 in the morning to return to that laptop. David slept heavily after his evening scotch, a habit that would prove useful for my investigation. The blue glow of the screen felt like secret light as I navigated through folders I had no permission to access. His organizational system was methodical. Color-coded folders. Date-stamped files. Everything labeled with corporate precision. Henderson_estate_strategy contained subfolders that made my stomach drop. Asset_transfer, medical_incapacity, successor_planning. He had been studying my daughter's inheritance like a business acquisition. The draft documents told the complete story. Version 1, dated 8 months ago, listed my daughter as primary beneficiary of her father's estate. Normal. Expected. Loving. By version 7, her name appeared with qualifiers: pending health evaluation, and subject to spousal oversight. Version 12 made her a secondary beneficiary. Version 17 erased her completely. How long do you think he'd been planning this? Each revision was saved with timestamps and metadata that my old computer classes had taught me to read. January 15th, 2 a.m. February 3rd, 11 p.m. March 22nd, 4 a.m. He'd been working on this during the sleepless hours when my daughter lay beside him, fighting lupus flares and trusting him to protect her. The Nevada LLC documents were in their own folder. Collins_Holdings_NV showed incorporation papers dated 10 months ago. 2 months before my daughter's first lupus symptoms appeared. The listed owner, Rebecca Collins Henderson. My daughter's legal name, used without her knowledge or consent. Bank routing numbers. Transfer authorizations. Account signatures that looked like hers but carried microscopic differences in pressure and angle. Everything designed to move her father's life insurance settlement and winery assets into accounts she couldn't access. I photographed everything. Screen by screen. Document by document. My phone's storage filled with evidence of systematic theft disguised as marriage. But the worst discovery was in his browser history. Lupus prognosis, life expectancy, spousal inheritance rights, California, medical incapacity, legal definitions, asset protection during chronic illness. He'd researched my daughter's disease not to understand her struggle, but to calculate how long he'd need to wait. Ever discovered someone was living a secret financial life? The shell company had been receiving deposits for months. Small amounts at first, 500 here, 1,000 there. Amounts my daughter wouldn't notice missing from accounts she'd trusted him to manage. But the pattern showed escalation. Last month's transfers totaled $43,000. Money that was supposed to pay for her medications. Money that was supposed to maintain the winery her father had built by hand. Money that was supposed to secure her future during an uncertain illness. I closed the laptop carefully, making sure the screen returned to exactly the position I'd found it. No fingerprints on the trackpad. No history of my late-night investigation. Back in my room, I transferred every photograph to a flash drive and hid it inside an old recipe box. Evidence of crimes that hadn't been completed yet but were already in motion. The Nevada LLC had been active for 8 months. Before her diagnosis. Tomorrow, I would call Martha Rodriguez, the paralegal who'd helped me navigate paperwork after my husband's death. Martha knew about document fraud. More importantly, Martha knew about justice. Martha read the metadata without her glasses. Her face went stone cold at the timestamps. The coffee shop on J Street stayed busy enough to mask quiet conversations. Martha had suggested it, neutral ground where 2 older women reviewing documents would look like routine business. She arrived carrying the leather portfolio that had intimidated lawyers for 30 years. "Show me everything," she said, sliding into the booth across from me. I spread the printed screenshots across the small table. Bank transfers. Draft documents. Browser history. The incorporation papers for the Nevada company that bore my daughter's name without her knowledge. Martha's eyes moved across the evidence with professional efficiency. No gasps. No shocked expressions. Just the steady evaluation of someone who'd seen document fraud before and knew how to prove it. "This isn't amateur work," she said finally, tapping the signature comparisons. He studied her handwriting. Practiced the pressure points. "Look here," he got the R in Rebecca almost perfect. Almost? The downstroke on the B is too controlled. Your daughter writes with emotional flow. This is mechanical copying. She pulled out a magnifying glass and held it over my phone screen. And he made one critical mistake. Legal predators count on your ignorance. Subscribe, stay protected. Martha pointed to a timestamp on one of the transfer authorizations. Sunday, 3:47 a.m. Banks don't process manual authorizations at 3 in the morning on weekends. This signature was backdated and uploaded later. Can we prove that? We can prove more than that. She opened her portfolio and pulled out a legal pad. Digital forensics will show the real creation time. But first, we need to preserve everything before he realizes you've seen it. Martha began writing in her precise paralegal script. Emergency preservation order. Asset freeze. Document authentication request. The legal terminology flowed from her pen like a second language. How long do we have? I asked. Depends on how confident he is. Overconfident criminals get sloppy with timing. But smart ones. She looked up from her writing. Smart ones move fast once they sense resistance. I thought about David's behavior that morning. The way he'd watched my face when I opened the envelope. The satisfaction in his whisper about summer deadlines. He was confident, maybe overconfident. But he wasn't stupid. What's our first move? We file this preservation order today. Freeze all asset transfers pending investigation. Then we start building the criminal case. Martha closed her portfolio with a definitive snap. Document fraud against elderly family members carries serious penalties in California. I'm not elderly, I said. Martha smiled, the first genuine expression I'd seen from her. No, Helen. You're dangerous. He just doesn't know it yet. What's your move, confront now or gather more proof? We walked to the courthouse together, two women carrying evidence that would change everything. Martha's heels clicked against marble floors with the confidence of someone who'd walked these halls for decades. Martha pulled out her phone. We need to lock these files before he deletes them. The filing window closed at 4:30. We had 6 hours to save my daughter's future. The clerk's stamp echoed in the courthouse hallway. Granted, she said without looking up. Martha had prepared me for rejection. Emergency preservation orders required compelling evidence and immediate threat. Most judges dismissed family disputes as civil matters requiring months of mediation. But the forged signature changed everything. Document fraud involving elderly family members, Martha had coached me to say. Active asset transfers in progress. The clerk studied our filing for exactly 93 seconds. I counted. Then she reached for the official stamp and brought it down with authority that made my chest flutter with hope. All financial accounts and real estate transfers are frozen pending investigation, she read from the order. Effective immediately. We walked to the parking garage without speaking. Martha's heels clicked against concrete with the rhythm of victory. I felt lighter than I had in weeks, like my daughter's future had weighed again. How long until he finds out? I asked. The banks will notify him within 24 hours. His accounts, his LLC, everything connected to the fraudulent documents. Martha unlocked her car and turned to face me. Helen, he's going to react. Men like this don't accept resistance quietly. Ever race to beat someone to their own crime? I thought about David's evening routine. Home by 6. Scotch by 6:15. Laptop open by 6:30 to check his investments and transfer daily amounts into his Nevada accounts. Tonight, those transfers would fail. What should I expect? Charm first. He'll try to convince you this is all a misunderstanding. When that fails, threats. When threats fail. Martha paused, studying my face. When threats fail, he'll get creative. I drove home slowly, taking the long route past the elementary school where my daughter had learned to read, past the library where she'd spent summer afternoons, past the small park where her father had taught her to identify birds by their calls. All the places that made up her life before David arrived with his handsome face and hidden agenda. The house looked exactly the same from the outside. Same rose bushes her father had planted. Same blue shutters we'd painted together last spring. Same mailbox with faded letters spelling Henderson. But everything had changed. The server would arrive at his office in 2 hours. I had to get home first. I parked in the driveway and sat for a moment, watching my daughter through the kitchen window. She was reading at the table, probably researching lupus management or new recipes that would work with her dietary restrictions. Trusting and careful and completely unaware that her husband's financial crimes were about to catch up with him. Time to go inside and play the quiet grandmother for a few more hours. The gold-embossed invitation arrived the same day he got served. His handwriting looked different when he was angry. David stood in the kitchen holding 2 pieces of mail that told opposite stories. The invitation announced his 40th birthday celebration at Sunset Ridge Vineyard, an evening of gratitude and new beginnings. The legal notice informed him that all his financial accounts were frozen pending fraud investigation. His jaw twitched as he read the preservation order. Once. Twice. Then he looked at me with eyes that had lost their practiced charm. "Did you know about this?" he asked, holding up the court papers. I was arranging flowers in a vase, keeping my hands busy and my voice steady. "Know about what, dear?" "Someone filed a complaint about my business accounts. Asset preservation. Document authentication." He set the papers down with controlled precision. "Someone who had access to private financial information." "That sounds serious," I said, adjusting a rose that didn't need adjusting. "I hope it gets resolved quickly. Would you attend the party of someone trying to destroy your family?" My daughter walked in carrying her laptop, settling into her usual chair to work on the freelance graphic design projects that supplemented their income. Income that David had been stealing systematically while she focused on managing her health. "What's all the paperwork?" she asked, glancing at the legal documents. "Just some business confusion," David said, his voice returning to its careful warmth. "Nothing to worry about." Actually, perfect timing, the birthday invitations arrived. He handed her the embossed card with obvious pride. 200 guests. Open bar. 5-course dinner. String quartet. Everything designed to project success and stability while his actual finances collapsed under legal scrutiny. "It's beautiful," my daughter said, running her fingers over the raised gold lettering. "You've worked so hard for this celebration." "We've worked hard," he corrected, but his eyes stayed on me. "Family support means every." The question carried weight. He was testing whether I would continue playing the compliant grandmother role or reveal myself as the source of his legal troubles. "They count on you staying quiet. Subscribe, learn to fight back strategically." "Family means protecting what matters most," I said carefully. "No matter what it costs." David smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He thought I was surrendering. Promising to stay quiet about the forged signatures and stolen assets in exchange for family peace. He leaned close and whispered, "You'll regret making this public." I smiled back. "Will I?" That evening, while David worked frantically on his phone, probably calling lawyers and accountants, I helped my daughter choose a dress for the party. Something elegant but not flashy. Something that would photograph well when the news crews arrived. "Are you excited about the party, Mom?" she asked, holding up a soft blue dress that brought out her eyes. "More than you know," I said. "It's going to be unforgettable." The safety deposit box key was exactly where my daughter said it would be. Inside, her father's original will, unaltered. My daughter had mentioned the key once, months ago, during one of her tired afternoons when lupus made thinking difficult. "Dad kept important papers in a box at First National," she'd said. "Keys in his old tackle box if anything ever happens to me." Nothing was happening to her. But something was definitely happening to her inheritance. The bank vault felt cold and institutional, all steel and fluorescent efficiency. Box 447 required 2 keys, mine and the bank's, to open. Inside, manila folders organized with my late son-in-law's careful handwriting. Insurance. Property deeds. Final will and testament. The will was exactly as I remembered from the funeral. My daughter as primary heir. The Napa winery specifically protected from sale, to preserve Henderson family legacy for future generations. Her father's signature bold and genuine, witnessed by 2 family friends I'd known for decades. I photographed every page, then pulled out the version David had filed with the probate court 3 months ago. Same document. Different details. How far would you go to protect a parent's legacy? In David's version, my daughter inherited only the house and personal effects. The winery, worth over $800,000, went to a family trust managed by surviving spouse. David had inserted himself as trustee with full authority to sell, transfer, or dissolve assets as beneficial to family welfare. The signatures looked identical at first glance. But I'd learned to see differences. Pressure. Angle. The small hesitation marks that show when someone is copying rather than writing naturally. My son-in-law had been a carpenter, a man who worked with his hands and signed documents with confident strokes. David's forged version showed careful copying, too perfect, too controlled. I found more than the will in that box. Property deeds for the winery showed my daughter's name as heir, dated and recorded 6 months before her marriage to David. Transfer documents that David had filed showed her voluntarily signing over ownership, due to medical incapacity and family restructuring. The medical incapacity claim was particularly cruel. My daughter functioned perfectly well with lupus. She worked, drove, managed her own medical care. But David's filed documents painted her as incompetent and declining, requiring spousal intervention for her own protection. Bank statements showed the systematic theft. Starting small right after their honeymoon. Growing bolder as my daughter's health struggles gave him cover. By last month, he was transferring $12,000 monthly into accounts she didn't know existed. I sat in that cold vault for 20 minutes, comparing documents and building understanding. This wasn't opportunistic greed. This was calculated fraud, planned from the beginning and executed with corporate precision. The amended will was filed 2 days after the funeral. He never waited for her grief to pass. I locked everything back in the box except my photographs. Evidence preserved. Trail documented. Pattern established. Martha would need to see this immediately. The preservation order had frozen his current accounts, but these documents proved historical theft spanning 3 years. Criminal charges, not just civil recovery. Walking out of that bank, I felt the weight of truth in my purse. Not just suspicions anymore. Not just concerns or gut feelings. Proof. Timestamps. Signatures that would crumble under expert analysis. David thought he'd been careful. He thought forgery was just about copying handwriting. He'd never considered metadata. The Nevada LLC had one listed owner, my daughter. Except she'd never been to Nevada. Martha's home office looked like a legal war room. 3 monitors. Stacks of law books. Wall charts showing document timelines and financial flows. She'd spent 2 days analyzing everything I'd brought her, calling in favors from forensic accountants and former prosecutor friends. "Sit down, Helen," she said without looking up from her computer. "This is bigger than we thought." Collins Holdings Nevada showed incorporation papers filed 14 months ago. Before the engagement. Before the wedding. Before my daughter's lupus diagnosis. David had been planning this theft since their 3rd date. "The corporate structure is sophisticated," Martha explained, turning one monitor toward me. "Shell company registered to a Nevada address that doesn't exist. Banking through Delaware. Asset transfers routed through 3 different states to hide the trail." The bank statements made my hands shake. Not from fear, from rage. Starting balance, $0. First deposit, $500, transferred the week after their honeymoon. My daughter's inheritance money, stolen in careful amounts while she recovered from wedding planning and settled into married life. Monthly deposits grew as her lupus symptoms appeared. $1,000 in March. $3,000 in April. $12,000 last month when her fatigue made her completely dependent on David for financial management. Ever discovered someone was living a secret financial life? Total theft over 3 years? I asked. $243,000. Martha's voice carried the weight of professional outrage. Plus the winery transfer he attempted last month, Worth another $800,000. Over $1 million. Stolen from a sick woman by the man who promised to protect her in sickness and in health. Can we get it back? Every penny. Plus criminal penalties for elder fraud, document forgery, and identity theft. Martha pulled up another screen showing California penal codes. He used your forged signature on federal banking documents. That's a federal crime. The corporate filings showed David's real expertise. Not corporate consulting, corporate fraud. Previous LLCs in Arizona and Texas, both dissolved after complaints from former business partners. A pattern of financial manipulation stretching back 8 years. He's done this before, I said. Successfully, until now. Martha began printing documents with systematic efficiency. Federal prosecutors love cases with clear evidence and sympathetic victims. A grandmother protecting her sick daughter from a career criminal? They'll want this case. Financial fraud happens to ordinary families. Subscribe to recognize the warning signs. My phone buzzed with a text from David, family dinner tonight. Important announcement. Martha looked at the message and smiled grimly. He's going to try to control the narrative. Make this look like family drama instead of criminal theft. The bank statements showed $240,000 in transfers. All authorized by my daughter's signature. Let him try, I said. We have metadata. The medical records showed he scheduled the lawyer consultation before her diagnosis was even confirmed. Dr. Patricia Chen had been my daughter's rheumatologist for 18 months, guiding her through the difficult process of lupus diagnosis and treatment planning. Professional but warm, she'd helped my daughter understand her condition without losing hope for the future. What she hadn't known was that someone had been accessing my daughter's medical portal using spousal authorization codes. The login records show unusual activity, Dr. Chen explained during our private meeting. Someone was downloading test results and prognosis reports within hours of their availability. Before we'd even discussed them with Rebecca. I sat in the same chair where I'd held my daughter's hand during difficult appointments. Where we'd learned together about flare management and medication schedules. Where she'd cried about feeling like a burden and I'd promised her that family meant carrying each other. Now I learned that David had been mining her medical information for legal advantages. What specifically was accessed? I asked. Dr. Chen pulled up the portal logs on her computer. Blood work results. Joint imaging. Prognosis reports. Even research articles about lupus progression and life expectancy that I'd shared for educational purposes. What kind of person researches their spouse's life expectancy? The timeline was devastating. David's first consultation with his divorce attorney happened on March 15. My daughter's lupus diagnosis was confirmed on March 22. He'd been shopping for legal representation before she even knew what was wrong with her body. Did my daughter know about these downloads? Patients receive notification emails for portal access. But spousal accounts are considered family support. Dr. Chen's voice carried professional frustration. We encourage family involvement in chronic disease management. We don't expect spouses to weaponize medical information. I thought about those difficult months when my daughter's energy vanished and her joints ached constantly. When she'd lean on David for everything from grocery shopping to financial management. When she'd apologize for being sick and thank him for being patient. He'd been patient, all right. Patient while planning her financial destruction. The browser history from his laptop told the complete story. Lupus disability benefits California, medical incapacity divorce proceedings, chronic illness asset protection strategies, spousal inheritance sick spouse. He'd researched her disease like a business opportunity. Dr. Chen printed the portal access logs and handed them to me in a sealed envelope. This information should help your legal case. What your daughter is dealing with medically is challenging enough without financial manipulation. How is she doing, really? I asked. Better than her husband led me to believe. His questions during appointments focused heavily on prognosis and limitations. Rebecca's questions focus on management and maintaining independence. Dr. Chen closed my daughter's file. She's stronger than he wants people to think. Ever watched someone realize they'd underestimated you completely? I left that medical office carrying proof that David had viewed my daughter's illness as profit opportunity. Not crisis requiring support. Not challenge demanding partnership. Pure opportunity for financial gain disguised as concern. The medical records showed he scheduled a lawyer consultation before her diagnosis was even confirmed. That evening, David made dinner while my daughter rested upstairs. He seemed relaxed, almost cheerful. His phone had been quiet all day, unusual for someone whose accounts had just been frozen by court order. "How was your day, Mom?" he asked, seasoning chicken with careful attention. "Productive," I said. "Spent time with old friends. Caught up on important matters." He glanced up from the stove. "Important matters?" I smiled the same trusting smile I'd been perfecting for weeks. "Oh, you know. Medical records. Legal documents. The usual grandmother concerns." His hand paused for just a moment over the pepper shaker. Then he continued cooking, humming softly like a man without any troubles in the world. But I'd seen that pause. That tiny hesitation that meant he was starting to wonder whether the quiet grandmother act was as real as he'd assumed. The lawyer's office smelled like leather and lies. He thought I was there to surrender. Robert Winchester III had the kind of corner office that charged $800 an hour just for the view. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Sacramento's financial district. Mahogany desk the size of my kitchen table. Diplomas and professional awards covering one entire wall. David sat beside me like a protective son-in-law, occasionally patting my hand with performed concern. He'd arranged this meeting, he said, to clear up the confusion about the preservation order and help me understand why family disputes should stay private. "Mrs. Henderson," Winchester began, "I understand you've been concerned about some financial documents. David asked me to explain why public legal action might not serve your daughter's best interests." I nodded like a confused grandmother who'd gotten in over her head. "I just want what's best for Rebecca." "Of course you do." Winchester's voice carried the practiced patience lawyers used with elderly clients they considered obstacles. Sometimes protective instincts can lead to misunderstandings about complex financial planning. David squeezed my hand gently. "Mom's been worried about Rebecca's medical expenses. I think she misunderstood some of the asset protection strategies we've implemented. Would you trust law enforcement to time justice perfectly?" I let them talk for 10 minutes. Winchester explaining why preservation orders hurt families. David describing his selfless management of Rebecca's inheritance during her health struggles. Both men convinced they were managing a frightened old woman who would accept their version of reality. Then I opened my purse. "I brought some documents that might help clarify things," I said, placing the manila folder on Winchester's expensive desk. "Bank records. Transfer authorizations. Incorporation papers for the Nevada company that uses my daughter's name." Winchester's professional composure cracked slightly as he opened the folder. "Where did you obtain these?" "Rebecca's safety deposit box. Her father's original will. Corporate filings that show dates and signatures." I smiled pleasantly. I also brought medical records showing portal access logs and browser history from David's laptop. David's hand tightened on mine, no longer gentle. "Mom, you're confused about the metadata reports from the forged signatures," I continued, pulling out Martha's analysis. "The ones that show creation times, device information, and printing locations for documents I never signed." Winchester studied the papers with the focus of someone realizing his client had lied about everything. David shifted in his chair, the confident charm evaporating like morning fog. "Mrs. Henderson," Winchester said carefully, "these documents suggest serious criminal violations." "Yes," I agreed. "They do. Justice delayed is justice denied. Subscribe, see how it's really done." David stood abruptly. "We're leaving. This is harassment." I remained seated. "Actually, David, I think we're just getting started." Winchester was already reaching for his phone. Legal ethics required him to report suspected crimes, especially when presented with documented evidence. The lawyer who'd been David's protection was about to become his problem. His attorney's face changed when I handed over the metadata reports. "Mrs. Henderson, we need to discuss settlement." David realized, finally, that the quiet grandmother act had been exactly that, an act. And the performance was ending. "Settlement?" I asked innocently. "For what?" Deputy Martinez didn't smile when I explained the party timing. "Public arrests require precision," she said. The sheriff's office smelled like burned coffee and fluorescent stress. Deputy Martinez had agreed to meet after Martha called in a favor from her courthouse days. The evidence folders sat between us on her metal desk: bank records, forged documents, LLC papers that told the complete story of David's calculated theft. "You want us to arrest him at his birthday party?" Martinez asked, flipping through the preservation order. "In front of guests?" "I want him arrested when justice is ready," I said. "The timing is your choice." She studied the metadata reports Martha had organized. Each page showed clear patterns of fraud, forgery, and financial abuse. The Nevada LLC alone carried enough evidence for multiple felony charges. "This is solid work," Martinez said. "But why the public venue? We could take him quietly at home." I thought about my daughter, trusting and vulnerable, still believing her husband was protecting her while he planned her destruction. I thought about the guests who would attend his party, business associates who might be his next victims, friends who thought they knew his character. "He used my daughter's illness as cover for theft," I said. "He forged my signature to make family complicit in his crime. He deserves the same respect he showed us. Would you trust law enforcement to time justice perfectly?" Martinez leaned back in her chair. "The party's this Saturday night? 7 p.m. Sunset Ridge Vineyard in Napa. About 60 guests, all his business contacts and social circle. We'll need coordination with Napa County since it crosses jurisdictions. Asset seizure warrants for the accounts. And timing that doesn't disrupt other guests unnecessarily." She opened a desk drawer and pulled out a business card. White cardstock with her direct number handwritten on the back. "Here's how this works," she said. "You attend the party. Act normal. When you're ready for this to end, you call this number. 10 minutes later, we arrive with warrants. What if he runs? Men like your son-in-law don't run from their own parties. They think the crowd protects them." Martinez closed the evidence folders. "Pride makes them stupid." I took the card and slipped it into my purse next to my reading glasses and the flash drive containing 8 months of David's crimes. "One question," Martinez said as I stood to leave. "Why didn't you warn your daughter first?" "Because she would have confronted him directly. And he would have destroyed evidence and disappeared." I paused at her office door. Sometimes protecting someone means keeping them innocent until justice is ready. She handed me a card with a direct number. "Call me 10 minutes before you want this finished. 10 minutes to end 3 years of lies. 10 minutes between David's performance and his arrest. 10 minutes to give my daughter her life back." I found her crying over the bank statements at 2 a.m. "Mom, all the accounts are empty." Rebecca sat at the kitchen table surrounded by papers, bank statements, investment summaries, insurance documents. Her laptop glowed with account login screens showing zeros where her inheritance should have been. "I couldn't sleep," she said, wiping her eyes with the tissue I handed her. Something felt wrong about the party expenses. David said the vineyard cost $12,000 for one night. So I checked the accounts. I sat beside her, keeping my voice steady. "What did you find?" "Everything's gone. Dad's life insurance. The winery accounts. Even the emergency fund." Her hands shook as she turned the laptop screen toward me. "Look at these transfers. 40,000 in March. 60,000 in April. All authorized with my signature." The bank statements showed the complete theft timeline. Small amounts at first, then larger chunks as David grew confident. The final transfer happened just last week, the remaining $18,000 from her medical savings account. I never signed these, Rebecca said. I never even saw these account numbers. What's stronger, a mother's protection or a daughter's determination for justice? I reached across the table and took her hands. I know, sweetheart. I've known for weeks. Her face changed. Confusion, then understanding, then something harder. You've known? How long? I told her about the velvet envelope. The forged signature. The preservation order Martha had helped me file. The evidence I'd been gathering while pretending to be the compliant mother-in-law David thought he'd manipulated. Why didn't you tell me? She asked. Because I needed proof he couldn't destroy. And because you would have confronted him immediately. Rebecca stared at the bank statements, processing months of deception while her husband slept upstairs in their bed. He did this while I was sick. While I trusted him to take care of everything. Yes. The party is tomorrow night. Yes. She closed the laptop and looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen since she was 16 and had caught her boyfriend cheating. Steel covered with hurt, but steel nonetheless. What's the plan? I explained about Deputy Martinez. The coordination with Napa County. The arrest warrants already prepared. The asset recovery process that would begin the moment David was taken into custody. He invited everyone we know, Rebecca said. His colleagues, our neighbors, people from church. He wanted them all to see his success. And they will see something, I said. Just not what he planned. Rebecca stood and walked to the window overlooking our backyard. The garden her father had planted still bloomed despite neglect. Roses and lavender that survived without David's attention. I want to be there when it happens, she said. Rebecca. No, Mom. I want to look him in the eyes when he realizes I know. When he understands that his sick wife and her aging mother weren't as helpless as he thought. She turned back to me with determination that reminded me of her father. He used my illness against me. He stole Dad's legacy. He forged your name to make you complicit. Ever watched someone realize they'd underestimated you completely? Let's make sure his party is unforgettable, she said. I hugged my daughter in that quiet kitchen, surrounded by evidence of betrayal and plans for justice. Tomorrow night, David would discover that the women he dismissed as weak and manageable had spent months building his downfall. She looked at me with steel in her eyes. Let's make sure his party is unforgettable. The chandeliers reflected off rented Ferraris. He never noticed the sheriff's unmarked car in the valet line. Sunset Ridge Vineyard looked like something from a luxury magazine. White lights wrapped around oak trees. Tables draped in cream cloth. A bar cart that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. David had spared no expense for his 40th birthday celebration, all funded with money stolen from his sick wife. I arrived early, wearing my best dress and the pearl necklace my husband had given me 40 years ago. Rebecca came separately, having told David she needed extra time to manage her energy for the evening. Truth wrapped in careful strategy. Mrs. Henderson. David's business partner waved me over to the Champagne station. David says you've been so supportive during Rebecca's health challenges. What a blessing to have family. Family takes care of family, I said, accepting a glass I wouldn't drink. David's been very thorough in his planning. The guests arrived in waves. Orange County finance types in expensive suits. Neighbors from our Sacramento community who'd driven up for the celebration. David's parents from Newport Beach, proud of their successful son who'd married into property and was building his fortune. Ever watched someone celebrate right before their downfall? David worked the crowd like a politician. Handshakes, inside jokes, casual mentions of his expanding business interests and new investment opportunities. I watched him lie to people who considered him a friend, selling them the fiction of his legitimate success. Helen. David appeared beside me with his arm around Rebecca's waist. Isn't this incredible? The vineyard manager says we might want to consider purchasing property up here. Investment potential is enormous. Rebecca smiled weakly. She looked beautiful but tired, conserving energy for what was coming. It's lovely, David. Very impressive. Only the best for my girls, he said, kissing her temple with performance affection. Speaking of which, I have an announcement to make during the toast. My pulse quickened. Oh. Just some exciting business news. New partnerships. Expanded portfolios. His eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a man who thought he'd played the perfect game. This is going to be our year. The powerful count on witnesses staying silent. Subscribe, see silence shatter. At 8:15, David climbed onto the small stage they'd erected near the vineyard's main building. The crowd gathered, champagne glasses catching light from overhead strings of bulbs. His parents beamed from the front row. His business associates pulled out phones to record the moment. Thank you all for celebrating with me tonight, David began, his voice carrying over the valley. 40 years old, and I've never felt more optimistic about the future. I stood near the back, phone in my purse, Deputy Martinez's card in my other hand. Rebecca positioned herself closer to the stage, looking like the supportive wife everyone expected her to be. This year has brought challenges, David continued, glancing at Rebecca with practiced concern. My wife's health journey has taught us both about resilience and planning for uncertain times. The crowd murmured sympathetic agreement. They had no idea he was using her illness as cover for systematic theft. But it's also brought opportunities. New business ventures. Strategic investments. And partnerships that will secure our family's future for generations. He raised his champagne glass toward the crowd. Rebecca raised hers automatically, years of marriage training her to support his moments. So here's to new beginnings, David said, his voice strong and confident. To building something lasting. To taking care of the people we love. I raised my glass too, smiling at my son-in-law as he celebrated with money he'd stolen from his sick wife. To endings, I whispered, pulling out my phone. The text to Deputy Martinez was simple, now. He raised his champagne for a toast about new beginnings. I smiled and raised mine to endings. 8 minutes later, headlights appeared at the vineyard entrance. David was still shaking hands and accepting birthday congratulations when Deputy Martinez stepped through the fairy lights with arrest warrants and asset seizure orders. The sheriff stepped through the fairy lights exactly as he said, "My beautiful wife." The timing was perfect. Deputy Martinez moved through the crowd with quiet authority. No sirens. No dramatic entrances. Just professional law enforcement arriving at a luxury party with warrants and handcuffs. David was mid-conversation with his business partner when he noticed the uniforms. His champagne glass stopped halfway to his lips. His eyes found mine across the crowd, and I saw the exact moment he understood. David Collins? Martinez's voice carried just enough to turn nearby heads. Yes? David set down his glass, his corporate charm slipping slightly. Is there some kind of problem? You're under arrest for document fraud, identity theft, and elder abuse. Martinez's words cut through the vineyard's evening sounds. You have the right to remain silent. The crowd went completely still. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Phone cameras appeared, capturing the moment David's perfect party became his public downfall. There must be some mistake, David said, his voice climbing toward panic. This is my birthday party. These are my friends and colleagues. No mistake, Martinez said, producing the arrest warrant. We have evidence of systematic financial fraud against your wife and forgery of your mother-in-law's legal documents. Real justice is patient but devastating. Subscribe for more stories of perfect timing. David's parents pushed through the crowd, confusion and embarrassment written across their faces. His business partner stepped back, suddenly remembering urgent calls he needed to make. The neighbors from Sacramento whispered among themselves, putting together pieces they'd missed. Rebecca? David turned to my daughter, desperation replacing his earlier confidence. Tell them this is crazy. Tell them I've been taking care of you. Rebecca stood perfectly still, looking at her husband with the clarity that comes after deception falls away. Taking care of me? David, you stole $300,000 from accounts I trusted you to protect. The crowd's whispers intensified. $300,000. Stolen from a sick woman by her own husband. You don't understand the complexity of estate planning, David said, his lawyer instincts kicking in even as Martinez moved toward him with handcuffs. Everything I did was legal asset protection. Forging signatures isn't asset protection, I said, stepping forward so the crowd could hear. Creating fake companies using my daughter's name isn't asset protection. Planning to divorce your sick wife to steal her inheritance isn't asset protection. Martinez placed the handcuffs with professional efficiency. David Collins, you're also being charged with creating fraudulent business entities and conspiracy to commit grand theft. What's the most satisfying part, the arrest or the wave goodbye? The vineyard manager appeared, apologetic about the disruption but clearly relieved the legal drama was leaving his property. Guests began gathering their purses and car keys, the party atmosphere replaced by the uncomfortable energy of witnessing someone's complete social destruction. David's business partner approached Rebecca as Martinez led David toward the parking area. Rebecca, I had no idea. If there's anything our firm can do to help with recovery. There is, Rebecca said, her voice steady and clear. Stop doing business with him. Immediately. I watched from across the crowd as David was placed in the patrol car. Through the window, he looked back once, meeting my eyes with a mixture of rage and disbelief. The quiet mother-in-law he dismissed as irrelevant had just destroyed his life in front of everyone who mattered to him. I waved goodbye with the hand he'd forged on legal documents. A small gesture that felt enormous. As they led him away, he looked back once. I waved goodbye with the hand he forged. The vineyard fell quiet except for car engines starting and guests making awkward exits. Rebecca stood beside me, watching the patrol car disappear down the valley road. It's over, she asked. The arrest is over, I said. The healing starts now. The winery is in my daughter's name again. The lupus is manageable. The quiet house feels peaceful now. 6 months later, I sit in the same kitchen where David handed me that velvet envelope. The morning light falls across the table differently now, warmer, somehow, without the weight of deception hanging over our daily routines. Rebecca manages the vineyard remotely, working with the manager her father had trusted for decades. The lupus remains challenging, but stress reduction from financial security has helped stabilize her symptoms. She laughs more often. Sleeps better. Trust is returning slowly, carefully. The criminal trial ended with a plea agreement. 5 years for fraud and identity theft. Full restitution ordered, though recovery takes time when someone has scattered assets across multiple states and fake companies. David's lawyer filed motions about his client's remorse and cooperation, but judges don't often reduce sentences for crimes against sick family members. His Orange County friends stopped calling after the arrest made local news. His business partnerships dissolved when clients learned about the fraud charges. The life he'd built on stolen foundation crumbled exactly as systematically as he'd built it. What would you preserve for a future you may never see? I kept all the evidence in a fireproof safe. Not from anger or revenge, but as protection for the next family who might face someone like David. Martha helped me organize everything into a reference file, warning signs, legal steps, documentation methods that worked. You saved more than money, Martha told me last week. You saved your daughter's ability to trust again. Rebecca brings me coffee now on Sunday mornings, sitting in the same chair where she discovered her empty accounts. We talk about her father's garden, her plans for expanding the winery's organic certification, her physical therapy progress. I still can't believe I lived with him for 3 years without seeing it, she said yesterday. He was good at hiding, I told her. But not good enough. The doorbell rings sometimes with deliveries addressed to Mrs. Collins. Rebecca marks them, return to sender, without opening them. Her legal name is Henderson again. Her accounts are protected with passwords only she knows. Her future belongs to her. They didn't applaud loudly. They nodded like people who finally understood. Drop the one lesson you'll carry with you from this story. This morning, I water the roses her father planted 15 years ago. They bloom despite neglect, despite the damage of harsh seasons, despite nearly being destroyed by someone who saw them as obstacles to his plans. Open sky, morning coffee, my daughter's laughter, the story finally written in hands that won't be erased.